So it's been quite a journey over the last 25 years as we built the National Research Platform. But I want to remind people, it was 2002 when we had the first NSF grant called the Optoputer, and that was built on top of the CENIC backplane, the newly emerged optical backplane. Now CENIC has 8,000 plus strand miles in California. But anyway, just as it started. So it's actually, the growth to the National Research Platform and CENIC AIR has been at the same time as CENIC's entire community on the optical network grew. Frank showed you earlier that even though we started with the Pacific Research Platform, Optoputer, then JCI, and the Pacific Research Platform in California, it has grown across the country, and that's why we changed it from the PRP to the National Research Platform a couple of years ago, and Frank has now has been there as the director, the leader of this. And as he said earlier in his excellent opening speech, it's built on the research and education networks across the country. And there's some 82 institutions. There are almost 32,000 CPU cores now on the PCs. They're all on PCs, in machine rooms, on campuses. You know, if you think about the cloud, they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to go build data centers and then to optically connect all these racks of PCs. We have the only academic cloud in the country like this that the NSF has supported us to build, and 1,400 GPUs. Now I'll talk about graphics processing units, GPUs all the way through, as a unit for machine learning and AI, because they are the engine, the compute engine hardware that all of the AI you hear about is run on. But let me just show you the California sector of what the national system looks like. This is a slide that Frank showed earlier, and I don't want to get into detail other than just scan the names of the institutions from Riverside, UC Riverside, to Stanford, to Poly Humboldt, to Chico. It's just across the entire educational and research fabric of California. But I'll point out one key thing. I told you that the NRP has like 32,000 CPUs. Half of those CPUs are in the state of California on CENIC AIR. 70% of the machine learning and AI GPUs are in California out of the 50 states. There is no other state that has a machine learning and AI infrastructure across its educational record like this. There is no country in the world that has what you're seeing on this slide. That is, of course, coupled with the fact there are only 3 countries, one of them being the US, so that's sort of weird, that have an economy bigger than California. China and Germany are the other 2, and then California. So we take it for granted being here, but California is in an incredibly privileged position at the start of this. In fact, has been responsible for a large development of the AI and ML revolution. Now, who uses all those 1,300 GPUs? This graph, and that's from January 1st to December 31st of 2025, and I'll be showing several times this. And the vertical is the number of GPUs out of that 1,400 that are being used. Each color is what we call a namespace. That's a project that has a PI at some campus in the country that is making use that day of those GPUs, and that's all of them added together. And you'll notice it's about 800 GPUs that are pegged 100% every day by these. There must be close to 800 projects like this across the country using this. But I told you there were 1,400. So what does that mean? That means that there's about 600 unused GPUs available for you to use, for your students, for your faculty, across the CENIC family. That's a lot of GPUs. And what we find with many of our researchers is they start with one GPU in the machine under their desk. They get frustrated because they can't do more than that. But then once they discover in California CENIC AIR, that goes away and they just bloom. And I'm going to show you 8 examples in my talk. That's 1% of the users that are currently in California using CENIC AIR. There are over 800. I'm going to start with the 2 big ones at the big, you might expect, at big research universities. At Caltech, UC San Diego in astronomy and climate. But then I'm going to show you some of, as I go down the list, these are using a little bit less each time, but CSU Northridge, Cal Poly Humboldt, and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And these are go from gravitational wave detection to reptile genomic analysis. It is incredibly diverse. And I have loved putting this talk together. It's taken me a month, many hours a day, digging down into the spreadsheets and trying to discover. I have not talked about any of these users before. So I wanted to come to this meeting with people you don't know and haven't heard of using CENIC AIR, but to give you an example of just the incredible breadth there is. And remember, there's 100 times this many that I'm going to tell you about already in California using it, using CENIC AIR. Now, I'm going to start with something that has personal meaning to me. 2 black holes in the universe colliding and creating ripples in space-time called gravitational waves that eventually get to the Earth. And I was very involved in this whole effort of setting this up. We built these laser interferometers, which are 2 like 5-kilometer long laser beams that go back, hit mirrors, come back, and then if they're out of phase, by about a part in 10 to the 18, that's a part in a billion, then they might have seen at one or the other in Hanford in Washington or Livingston in Louisiana, they might have seen a gravity wave come through. And here's what a gravity wave looks like. And you'll notice the top yellow one is seen in the Hanford detector, and the next one down, in the Hanford detector, the next one is in Louisiana at the Livingston. But they only count because noise, fluctuating noise would make noise waves too, if they perfectly coincide. And of course, how do you figure that out? You have to compute. And so these are the first 2 of these new generations. Everything we knew about astronomy before was in the electromagnetic spectrum, from radio to optical, infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray. This is an entire spectrum parallel to that in gravitation. We've never understood what's going on and some of the most energetic events in the universe. They're now building these around the world. And then all that data, which is like every second coming in, goes into the open science grid that is clusters coupled all over the world that Frank Wertheim has been the executive director of for years. And then that drops through to the NRP GPUs, because they don't have that many GPUs in the open science grid, when they need to use the GPUs to do the machine learning to see, is that really a black hole colliding with another one? And if so, what are the masses of the black hole? Are they spinning? Maybe it's a black hole in a neutron star. And this is brand new in human history. Until 2016, we had never seen this, not one. So what did they use? Well, this is my first example. This is Peter Kuvars at Caltech. That's where the lab that takes all the data in and runs it to find out these detections. And they run on the NRP GPUs. And notice this thing is peaking at 122 GPUs per day. That's a lot of computing. This is massive, massive computing. And this is the most massive computing I'll talk about. Well, this is me, and I guess that's 50 years ago. I'm 77 now, I was younger then. I was the first person to figure out you could put Einstein's equations of general relativity on the computer and solve them for colliding black holes, and that's the gravity wave that I computed 50 years ago. 40 years later, the first gravitational wave was actually detected, and that was what led to the Nobel Prize for the detection, the first detection of gravitational waves. HBC Wire interviewed me about that and about what was it like to wait 40 years from when you were a grad student getting your PhD to, if they told me, by the way, the computing power used today is 1 billion times the computing power I had, and I had a CDC 66 and 7600, which were the supercomputers of their time 50 years ago. And what I love about this, and look at the date, March 5th this year, this is an announcement. Scientific American did a whole article on it. This is from Caltech, being, along with MIT, the two places in the country that are center for this. And they've got a whole catalog now of hundreds and thousands of these collisions that have been seen since the first one in 2016. And so that's in just 10 years. So this has gone from the first light to an entire new field of astronomy. And a great deal of it is at Caltech running on the NRP. I'm now going to shift gears from the cosmos to planet Earth. You may have noticed last week or two, the climate seems to be warming. Particularly any of you who lived in the Southwest. It was a once in maybe 1,000-year event. And this is a new faculty member at UC San Diego, Duncan Watson Perez. And this is his. Now we're noticed we're down to about 50 GPUs per day and a little more sporadically. He's a brilliant professor that is in both the Data Science Institute and in the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I asked him, what's he doing with the NRP? And he says, well, you know, clouds have, on planet Earth, have a lot to do with whether the heat coming in from the sun stays on the Earth or reflects back into space. And they're critical in our climate models that we do. But it turns out that when you look at them from the, these are satellite images, you'll see how there's sort of that hexagonal pattern when they're sort of beginning to break up. Those are called holes, I'm told, cells in the literature. And he was able to take massive amounts of the satellite data, run it through the NRP for machine learning, and show that for the first time there was this daily peaking at midday evidence of these holes forming. Well, once he found there are all the holes, what does he do? He takes 500,000 individual holes, cells that he saw in all that data. This is what we mean by big data. And runs it through the NRP, tracking how they move, and to get for the first time the dynamics of these things that are critical for the big models in the climate modeling, and shows that they scale with the surface temperature of the ocean that they're over. He then went on to look at the actual microphysics of the cloud droplet sizes. And all of this is data, machine learning data analysis from data that's been sitting there in these satellite archives for many years. But until you have the tools that Frank was talking about this morning, you can't find out these interesting results. But then he says, but you know, the trouble is when you run these climate models, if you want to run a 10-year forecast, it can take weeks on the fastest supercomputer on the planet. And we want to know daily forecast of how things are going to change for temperature, precipitation, and so forth. So it turns out you can use AI, and I won't get into the details on all of this stuff. I don't expect you, I don't understand what a lot of this means. But the main thing is I want you to get just the impact that it's beginning to have. And this is using a particular form of AI called variational autoencoder. You don't need to worry about that. But it basically works in a 2,000 dimensional space. And it goes through and tries to figure out, it's a neural net, about these cloud appearances. Because in the supercomputer climate models, they've always assumed that, well, you got cumulus, or you got stratus, or you got, you know, sort of very general descriptions of cloud types. Turns out that doesn't work when you do the actual numbers. And by doing this deep dive with machine learning using the CENIC AIR, he was able to show that there's no actual cloud morphology that works. You have to have a continuous type of clouds to actually mirror what's going on in nature. And if you want to get the right answers, you have to be able to do that. So then he said, I went into these climate models and we used machine learning on the output of the climate models. We trained it on the output of the climate models. And we used as the input the international climate modeling comparison that goes between all the climate model in the country, and used a technique called diffusion model to end up with making almost like a toy version of the climate model, but it has in the machine learning, in the training set, the output of all the models that have been run. And this means you can now run these things for daily forecasts. So this is now looking, these are, it's hard to see, I'm sure, the details, but they're actually now able to run a daily forecast, which means you can do 365 days a year of what the impact is going to be where you live from this climate modeling. That was never possible with running, you can't run the full model. So you use machine learning to scale down those giant models from their output. So it's accurate because it's based on those things. But now you can run it for every day. You can do twice the spatial resolution. So like, is it in Monterey or is it in San Diego? Or is it in San Francisco? That level, okay? And this takes 8 NRP GPUs for training and 1 for inference. So it's an amazing change and I want to keep telling you, 8 GPUs. Remember, there's 600 you have yet to use. 8's a small number, and yet look at the impact. This is what I discovered myself when I was doing this preparation. I had no idea. Here's my next example from CSU Northridge. This is someone who's I didn't know almost all of these professors and students until I did this work. Here's 5 GPUs peaking over the entire 2025, but he used almost 13,000 GPU hours on this project and 2 namespaces. And what he's looking at is image denoising. What does that mean? Well, here's a fuzzy image. It can be a photographic image, it can be whatever. And here, when you use deep learning on it, is what it really has in it. And so you can imagine that there's a lot of software and places that want to understand how to do this. And this has been a major artificial intelligence test bed for for decades, actually. And so I said, well, what has it made a difference to you personally to have CENIC AIR available to you at CSU Northridge? And he said, well, you have to run millions of model parameters on deep learning, and we didn't have GPUs. But then CENIC and CSU Northridge got to talking about the availability of CENIC AIR, and all of a sudden I realized we had free access to multiple GPUs. These are his words. And we could have these Jupyter hubs we could run, and we're now able to do deep learning research, and we can compete with the big people, okay? And here is, he sent a plot of log plot versus goodness is vertical, and the number of parameters is 1 million, 10 million, 100 million across the bottom. And here's his now, and his is the quote. He said, with CENIC AIR, we've been able to do a 1.2 million model parameters, and our performance, you see as the vertical, is about the same as these others that are all famous and in zillion articles and research journals, and there's software companies that based on it and everything else. He was not able to compete at CSU Northridge until he got access to CENIC AIR, and then everything changed. And this is a story I'm hearing over and over again. He sent me these images. He says, look over how clear it is. Oh, on the right-hand side, that's his, and all these other ones. These are the big boys, and his is just as good. And it's free to him as a professor. He didn't have to write a grant. He just used it. Okay, now let's go to Poly Humboldt. I love this story. I had no idea this happened. Now we're going to undergraduates, getting back to Frank's comment about how education is the killer app. This undergraduate, John Gerbing, who I'd never heard of before, at Humboldt, just used 21 GPUs as a peak. He only used 2,000 GPU hours. And remember, that's now orders of magnitude down from what Caltech is doing. What did it do for him at Humboldt? Well, it turns out that he's working with a professor who studies microglia. I didn't know very much about microglia. I did because Mark Ellisman had worked on them with electron microscopes at UCSD for decades that I knew about. But what they do is they're immune cells in the brain. They only are in the brain. And they protect the neurons in the brain from all kinds of problems. And they kill the dying ones, and they look for bad stuff that gets to the blood-brain barrier. But they have different phenotypes. And how do you tell the phenotypes? Well, you use machine learning on MRIs and imagery of the brain sections. And so he did this project in which he compared transformer-based and convolutional-based, these are types of neural nets that are at the basis of all the stuff you use for AI. And he wrote up this poster, and this is the professor that, associate professor in math and data science at Humboldt, who he works for, went to the Mathematical Association of America annual competition for Math Fest, and he won the undergraduate researcher in mathematical or computational biology across the United States because of his 21 GPU hours. He's now at Berkeley finishing his undergraduate degree in applied math. I love this story. Then we go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, again, a professor I was not aware of, a namespace out of the 773 that I looked through, Cal Poly Chan Lab that I had never looked at. And again, 6 GPUs for the peak. 1% of the available ones that haven't been used. What would that do? Well, and I give you a picture of each of these use cases because I want you to see what a user looks like. They study the genetics of reptiles and amphibians, reconstruct the phylogeny tree, the whole history of evolution of that particular species, and where they are in the environment in a way to conserve our very rapidly depleting species. And so it's a field called conservation genetics. Here they are down in New Mexico and Texas, finding these the reptiles and the amphibians. But then they use the NRP because they sequence the DNA, the genome of each of these, and then they're able to look at the variants. That means the difference in the DNA of this version of the reptile versus the same species but a different individual over here. And of course, that's how nature adapts by those changes. And they're able to do it in comparative genomics. And I said, well, where are you going with this? Well, we're going to the Channel Islands. And so they're out doing this field work on the Channel Islands and looking at the local adaptation on the islands, because of course a lot of changes happen in evolution when you get on an island versus being on the mainland. And again, they couldn't do this without that small amount of NRP time that they got through CENIC AIR. Well, let me switch from individual namespaces, projects that professors have defined, to the Jupiter hub that Frank mentioned, which was developed by Perez at Berkeley back almost, I don't know, about 2017, Frank, turns out, about just when we were starting the PRP. And Jupiter, as I say, Jupiter is an environment that you can use. Jupiter notebooks allow you to have all of your code live, your data, your visualization. You can just have a URL. It's for the web. What instead of books or videos or music, it's a code and data, and that URL is the same as a URL to go to Amazon or something else, right? So. Anyway, it's widely used, and San Bernardino in particular has made major use of that. Each of those white namespaces is a name of a namespace just from CSU San Bernardino, and they're all different projects, but they have been the master of using this. They've used almost 100,000 GPU hours through these different Jupyter notebooks. And you can go in and look at the individual users, and that's 4,000 GPU hours at the top. Each of those is a user at San Bernardino who has been able to reach in and use it. And this is getting at Frank's penetration of individual campuses that has to happen. They're one of the leaders in this. The TIDE grant, this was an NSF grant that was led by San Diego State University. They got a CENIC Award in Innovation a couple of years ago, and they got a grant to provide access to many of the CPUs. There'll be a talk later this afternoon on this by Gerard and Mike, who are here to give you the details. So I won't go into the details. I'll just point out that one of the namespaces is CSU TIDE Jupyter Hub, peaking at 1,600. They've used almost 43,000 GPU hours, just because San Diego State said, we're going to go do something that everybody in the CSU system can benefit from, and put it in our machine room. And each one of these is, again, an individual user. So those two, San Diego State University and San Bernardino, are two CSUs who are just leading the whole effort in using this. And I would say probably outpacing almost any other university in the country at doing this. Now I'm going to end with taking you through one namespace, one project namespace. For historical reasons, I am the PI of this. I have no memory. Of course, I'm getting old, so, could be. I just forgot. But I don't know. Tom says it to make me look good, to actually look like I actually do something, to have a namespace. But this, until this talk, has been terra incognita. We never knew who was using the I mean, we, Tom, Frank, me, people that look at this stuff, had never been able to get down and dig into who is using this one namespace where we make Jupyter available to anybody in the country. And it runs 150,000 GPU hours. That's fairly large. So, Mohammed Sada, who is a staff member under Frank, Tom asked him, could we find out who's there? And he said, yeah, I think so, and everything. And I said, okay, I want to know for 2025, and that's all of the users 2025. Turns out there are users in 7 of the 10 UC campuses, 13 of the 23 CSUs, and 1 of the San Diego community colleges are using Jupyter Lab, that one namespace. So I'm going to just give you 3 examples, and I'm going to start with, I picked these out. There were 500 users nationally that use more than 1 GPU hour in calendar 2025. 340 of those 500 were in the state of California, connected by CENIC, using CENIC AIR. Again, California totally outweighs. I mean, you can talk about, you can talk about other states, more power to you. This is the Bear Republic. Okay, I'm going to talk about ones. I was just blown away at all 3 of these. I never knew these users were there until I did this deep dive. Okay, so we're going to start with CSU Dominguez Hills and a completely different non-science application in computational finance. Then we're going to go to Fullerton with a grad student and a professor that are doing amazing work that aging people like myself are particularly interested in, how your brain goes bad over time. And then UC Riverside, which we'll end up with in precision agriculture, which, as you know, is one of the emerging themes for CENIC and CENIC AIR. So this professor of finance at Dominguez Hills, and I think Dominguez Hills, this is the first example I've ever used from Dominguez Hills. I didn't know that anyone was using it at CSU until I went and did this deep dive. This is, by the way, one of the largest, maybe one of the largest users of those 340 in California. And he's a professor, and I asked him, did it make any difference to you that you were able to get to start using CENIC AIR? He says, well, CENIC AIR has transformed my research life and put me on a level playing field. Does that sound familiar, like with the denoising thing? I now have been able to develop and test several algorithms in the area of economics and financial econometrics. In a nutshell, with CENIC AIR, I am now able to do what I've always dreamed of doing, but wasn't able to because I didn't have access to the technical resources, the GPUs I needed. A recurring theme. And this is what makes me so excited about the development over the last decade or 2 of CENIC AIR. Well, he's used 3,000 GPU hours and 21,000 CPU hours on Jupyter Lab. And what did he do? Well, he says, you know, in our field of finance, we look at US macroeconomic variables, and then we try to predict prolonged bear markets, market downturns, and then there are these sudden crashes, right? And so the question is, can we predict either of these from macroeconomic data? And after running on the CENIC AIR, he says he finds that there's a complete difference. He says the persistent bear markets are pretty forecastable from the changes in the economic variables of the country. But they're essentially unlearnable. These are his terms, his words, even with all this machine learning from macro. And that's the sort of black swan thing. It's when you think you know what's going on and all of a sudden it smacks you in the head and you didn't see it coming. But this is a formal research, and he said, now, I haven't published this yet, so don't share all the details. And I just love that it's making such a difference in a professor's life there. Well, what about Fullerton, who's been very engaged with the build out of CENIC AIR? Well, this graduate student, Axcat, and his professor are doing brain MRI imaging analysis. So they take brain MRIs and they're trying to figure out, does this brain have Alzheimer's, or is it on the way to Alzheimer's? Does it have normal cognitive decline, or is it just a healthy brain? Well, how do you tell? So what they've done is do a two-stage machine learning platform, and I won't get into the details, but they can, by looking at micro aspects that most MRIs, the readers of the MRIs wouldn't be able to see these micro aspects. That's what's new about it. They used 4,500 GPU hours. And again, I won't go into the detail, but they looked at over 1,200 brain MRIs of participants and were able to class them using machine learning based on these previously not used. I mean, brain MRIs are there, but until you have figured out that these particular new micro signatures help classify, and this is things where it may be decades before the physical characteristics you associated with things like Alzheimer's develop. And they quote they said is that CENIC AIR enabled efficient processing of these 1,200 MRIs, including automated brain segmentation, radiomics, that's really detailed MRI, feature extraction, and machine learning analysis. And the key result was there are these new microstructures, and I'm going to send them my brain MRI and just say, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Actually, I know from my brain MRI that my hippocampus, which is your memory base, is in the lowest 1% of men at 77 in the US. Does that matter? Well, I don't know, but it's an indication. What was that? I forgot. What? But this is the largest demographic shift to people over 65 in the history of this nation, probably in the history of the world, is underway. This is central to the future of all of us and to countries around the world. So this research with this grad student and the professor are really critical. And their previous one was on breast cancer, doing very similar kind of work. So Fullerton, again, on the leading edge of research. So I'm going to bring up now the third example from UC Riverside. Again, someone that I'd never heard of before, but I discovered because he was like the second largest user in California, the Jupiter lab. Demetrius, why don't you come up here?
Thank you.
So this, introduce yourself. He's going to take over for the next few minutes.
Hello.
I wanted you to see what, I showed you photos of CENIC AIR users. And I thought, once I found out about him, and Tom Devani and John Graham and I exchanged back and forth, I said, Demetrius, you've got to come to CENIC 2026, because I want to show the audience what a CENIC AIR user looks like and talks like in the flesh, not just a photo, okay? So the others are just a photo. This, you get the real thing, okay? So he's doing amazing frontier work with his professors at UC Riverside in multimodal and near-ground precision agriculture with mobile robots because he comes from the field of robotics. That's where he's really focused on. And so I'm going to let him talk through the slides. I'll just sit here and quietly click away.
Thank you so much, Professor. And also I would like to say, I would like to thank also for the opportunity, and I will describe how I really liked using and all the experience of using the CENIC AIR, but I will get into the details because that's a really good opening to showcase the problem statement of my work. So currently, nowadays, we know that given the environmental changes, there is an urgent need for daily or frequent data collection, basically observation in the field. There are many reasons basically that we want to do that nowadays, just to be able to understand better the health status of the field, understand the diversity of the field, improve basically the irrigation practices, so many things, and they go on from cost analysis, basically the profit analysis. However, we really know nowadays that these daily procedures are quite laborious, and especially if we are operating in really large fields. And especially here in California, that there are examples like that. So with CENIC AIR and with my work, and I'm a PhD in robotics and machine learning, basically concentrated in computer vision, I was able to develop one of the models that I was able to try also in the fields to build a framework for robots themselves to have on board and be able to, with a single pass, traverse and process online in real time, basically, multimodal or multispectral information. Maybe we can see the photos too. While basically the robot traverses in order to use previous captured knowledge and adapt to the new field and improve detection and localization practices in the field. So this is quite important because nowadays, since there are a lot of availability with different models, when we deploy these models into different fields, sometimes we see that they are not quite adaptable. So it is quite important to find methods that we can actually deploy and make use to improve practices like that. So here you can see in the photos, I was able to deploy this model that I developed with CENIC AIR and also with my work in orange groves. This is back in UC Riverside, and also in vineyards in Modesto, California. And I mean, the results were quite exciting. So yeah, let me get more into details on the specifics. So that is just an example of a robot, how it can operate nowadays in the field. You can see that these are some of the sensors that we are using right now, and all these sensors are, first of all, calibrated and time synchronized all together. For example, in that case scenario, what I used was some of the sensors include cameras that can span from the optical spectrum up to close to the near infrared. That is really important in agriculture for us to get a better understanding for the tree health status from getting the NDVI information, but also a lot of other sensors that use for the robot to be able to be autonomous operating in the field. So this is so with CENIC, I was able to deploy and test out different backbones in order to see what is fitting best, and also maybe with a final, I think I have the thing, yes, so be able to use different open available data sets to see what is better fitting with our problem. I was not able to do this before, and also do use cases in the field. So just for an example, this was a vineyard in Modesto, and we tried and we mapped basically vine trunks that they were not previously mapped from the operators themselves. So this was really important information for the operators there. So, and among all, what was the easiest part of it was for me using CENIC AIR, basically in Jupyter Lab, the easiest basically way of me to deploy that. This was the first thing I discovered. So given my use case also last year by using the Jupyter Lab, something that I noticed was that even though it was such an easy case for me to use that and deploy a model like mine, it was really easy to resolve any technical issue I had. In some cases, I can say that it was easier for me to resolve a technical issue I had in the Jupyter lab maybe in a day that if I was comparing with local resource I was using in the university. So for the size of the project, I was really, from the administrator side and from the office hours, as you say, and they have, was really, I could not, perceive that. So it was really amazing for my work and also to go forward. And also something to point out was that the paradox was that I discovered that not a lot of my friends knew about the use case of NRP. So this is something I will try to educate, and I'm doing with my friends more and try to spread the word. So as I said, and that's another thing that also came up with my work, was that as I said, I'm working with robotics, but most on the ground, near the ground, and from data analysis on the ground. These are also my professors back in UC Riverside. At the same time, with CENIC AIR, what I discovered, of course, and I'm excited to see the work, is that there is a really advanced technologically vineyard close to here, maybe a bit more north, the Iron Horse Vineyard, that they also use a lot of sensors and to be able to assess and improve many of the practices nowadays. They're happening in the vineyards. Of course, they have quite interesting also aerial robots, so that's an interesting one. What's the common thing between these two works that I recently discovered is that both of them are based in CENIC, right? CENIC. So for me, it was quite, so through the conference and also through the CENIC platform, I came in touch, of course, with the organizers in the Iron Horse Vineyard. And I think at some point, maybe we could initiate from my end, from my lab in UC Riverside, and from their side, maybe a new collaboration that we could combine the knowledge I got from my experience in the past year in my project and also from their work. And some of these, I have some applications here that I have thought that could enable a lot on that. So I think maybe I should have one more, yes. So things that we could use case, yes, exactly, these ones. So is that, first of all, my model that I developed is not only bounded to mobile robots. We can easily use that model to test it on an aerial robot. Also from a previous experience, since I work in collaborations of aerial and ground robots, something that we can work also on is to combine this information in real time between the robots, so we further improve many of the assessments that be happening, of course through CENIC as the background, right? And finally, something that we can test out is that we can modify ground robots to be able to stream data as already they are using in the basically in Iron Horse Vineyard. So there are some of these ideas. But yeah, this was quite a surprise for me, and thank you so much for it was, yes, it's a new world for me. And
Thank
all
you,
of this
Dimitri.
because of the NRP Jupyter Lab. But yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
And as I'll show in a second, I just got 2 more slides, or 3 more slides, that with no technical details. You're going to see several talks yet in CENIC 2026 on this. Joy Serling is here, as is Tom DeFani and John Graham, and they're going to have multiple sessions going into the details of this wonderful innovation in CENIC of this Iron Horse testbed. Okay, so let me just try to pull us all together and say, personally, what did I take from this deep dive? First, you saw on the map, and you've seen these maps now develop over the last few years, more and more campuses are hosting equipment in their machine rooms that's already prior connected by CENIC. I mean, this is sort of a miracle. We're not spending hundreds of billions of dollars to go build new data centers, cause California's campuses have a zillion data centers, all connected by CENIC at multi-gigabit speeds. So and they have empty racks. So we're just putting these machines in the racks. Tom literally drives them to the campus, and John and Tom often help install locally these things. But also we're seeing researchers, and as Frank has focused on, educators are more and more beginning to use these CENIC AIR computational storage resources. The diversity of disciplines is mind-boggling. It's almost like everything that is studied in universities is beginning to do it, because the AI machine learning revolution will leave no stone unturned. Every field will be transformed. And I believe, as Ilkay said, to the better. I wanted to give you a few of these individual stories in their own words of how the professors and graduate students and undergraduates felt that this was transforming their world. They literally, their lives were changing. I mean, what they could do, there's so many opportunities where they can think of, they know what the basic science, they could do it if only they had the resource. They don't have a giant checkbook to go to the commercial cloud vendors. They don't have on their campus necessarily the amount they need. But notice how many I told you they peaked at 4 GPUs. They peaked at 8 GPUs. There's 600 of them available. So the expansion space in California that we have before us is awesome. And if this just continues, it'll be a tsunami. So, start breathing scenic air. End of talk. Of course, this was built on many years of hard-won NSF grants, all of the regional networks that tied together, all of the universities and campuses that host the hardware. But I wanted you to note that there's a lot more to come in the next 2 days. So these are just cut from your program of different things we're going to be hearing about. We're going to hear Tide. We're hearing about the Iron Horse Vineyard several times. We're going to hear the CSUs in general have been the great expansion space in the last couple of years. And so I really encourage you to go to as many of these as you can because it's really transforming our state. And as I say, there are only 3 countries in the world with more economy than California, and one of them is the United States, and that's because of us. So anyway, onward to the future.